Do tax-free savings accounts have adverse effects on Canadians' ability to save for retirement? I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Today, we're joined by a very special guest to talk about two interesting saving vehicles that Canadians can choose from: tax-free savings accounts and registered retirements. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Zhang. I'm a finance professor at Ryerson University, and thank you, Marco, for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here.
We're happy to have you on. So can you just briefly give us the gist of the study that you worked on and the primary finding that you discovered?
Certainly. This study is about how Canadians has been using RRSPs and TFSAs since 2009, when TFSA was introduced as a new saving vehicle for Canadians. And our goal essentially is to try to find out whether TFSA help Canadians to save more, or it actually reduce the savings from other sources, such as RRSP. And what we found is kind of a mixed results. Some of the savings in TFSA are actually diverted from RRSP, and the rest of them, we don't have enough data to say where they're from. They could be newly created savings. They could also be savings transferred from, say, taxable saving account. If that is the case, then TFSA has not achieved its goal to increase or to help Canadians to save more for retirement.
That's amazing. It's actually a very interesting discovery. And I think you actually had some concrete values. Can you just briefly tell us about those?
So if to put it in numerical terms, we found, for example, at the average contribution level for people who increase their TFSA contribution by 1%, the decrease in RRSP would be roughly about 0.4%. And if we want to put in dollar terms, that would be $1 new saving in TFSA might have reduced the RRSP by roughly 33 cents. And the rest of the 68 cents could come from taxable saving accounts, or it could be just new savings people put in as opposed to spending.
And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what these numbers mean. But before we get to the nitty gritty, I just want to ask you a general question at first. What made you interested in researching this topic?
Well, in general, there has been a lot of confusion about how to use TFSA and RRSPs. Every year at tax seasons, there are just so many articles in news being written about where you should put your tax-preferred saving in. And that's where the study started. And in general, we're more interested in finding how could Canadians save more so they can comfortably retire.
So as you said, every 1% increase in a TFSA contribution can typically result in approximately a 0.4% decrease in a registered retirement savings. Very broadly, what does that mean for Canadians? I saw in the article, you guys came to two conclusions: that it's not going to result in enough savings for retirement, and the second, it really affects the government. They're going to be receiving less tax revenue. Can you expand on those two?
Of course. The first implication is that the money that people take out of RSP and put into TFSA could be used for purposes other than retirement savings. People who are familiar with RSP knows that the purpose for the money you put in RSP is for retirement. People don't tend to take the money out early because there is an extra tax penalty for early withdrawals. Where for TFSAs, there's no limitation on when and how much or how you're going to withdraw the money from. You can just use it as a regular saving account. For that reason, it's quite common that people use TFSA as a regular saving account to save up for, say, a trip, a vacation, or a large item purchase rather than for retirement. And if the money moving out of RSP and into TFSA, that essentially says that people are saved less for retirement and move that chunk of money into short-term savings for, say, short-term saving goals or intermediary saving goals.
I also found the other point very interesting too. The government's going to be receiving less tax revenue. I assume that's because RRSPs, it's not necessarily tax-free. It's more so a deferred tax. The government will collect it at a later date. But
That's correct.
tax-free saving that is essentially tax-free. Can you talk more about those implications?
Of course, the TFSA is not, it's tax-free in the sense that the income you earn from your TFSA account is not taxed, but it has been taxed when you put the money in the account because the contribution you make into the TFSA account is your after-tax income. So in that sense, TFSA is taxed before you have put the money in. But from that point on, all of the future incomes you make, say you invest in mutual funds, in stocks or bonds, all of those income you make will be tax-free for the future. So that's not a case for RRSP because RRSP is a deferred tax. That means in the future, when you take your money out, no matter it's, say, dividend or interest you earned, all of these income are taxable by the government. So that's essentially the difference of RRSP and TFSA in tax implications for the future when you take money out.
And it's a very important distinction to draw. I kind of want to shift our attention now to look at the sample used because I was going through the tables. It's very informative. It kind of gives you a rough insight, sort of a snapshot into the ways different demographics in Canada are typically using the different savings vehicles. So just to start off, what exactly did you base your calculations on when you were arriving at the previous figures?
So that's essentially this very cool database Statistics Canada provides researchers to do studies with, and that include about 20% of all Canadian tax filers. So to draw this conclusion, we essentially used everyone between age 18 and 71, which is the age group that can contribute to both accounts as Canadians. So these are the sample we used over the years from 2009 to 2015. So we have over 20 million Canadian tax filers data to come to this conclusion. It's not based on a specific age group, but for all of the tax filers who have contributed to an RRSP or TFSA at least once over that time. We do have some results for different age groups. And the interesting finding we have across different age groups is that for younger generations, especially for people in their 20s, TFSA has been a much more attractive saving tool than RRSP.
And that's very interesting too. I found those tables to be so informative. There is this in table 1 of her report. I'm going to link to it in the description. There is essentially 3 panels. The first one, it breaks down the information into participation rates by year, 2009 and 2015. Then there's a panel B, which breaks down the participation rates based on income quartiles. And there is a third one that talks about age groups. I want to start at the participation rates by year, though.
Okay.
The first finding that I want to talk about is that the rates at which people invest into both the RRSP and a TFSA. In 2009, 7% of the sample did invest in both. In 2015, it went up to 9%. It seems to be not the largest increase, but there is an upwards motion in people making use of both of these, you could say, systems or methods of saving. The thing that stood out to me even more than that, though, is that steady throughout the years, it's been over 60% on average of Canadians who aren't using either. What do you take from that?
Well, that is a very well-known problem Canadians are having. That is, in general, we're not prepared to retire financially. Majority of Canadians are not saving enough to comfortably retire. That's a message come across from these numbers. Across all these years, over 60% of the Canadian tax filers do not use either account. It could be that they're not saving enough. It could also be that they're not using RRSP or TFSA to save. They just don't have the enough knowledge or skill or means to invest in these tax-favored accounts.
And tying on to that, when we move on to the analysis based on income earning quartiles, so Q1, the lowest earners, only 3% of them actually make use of an RRSP. To me, it signifies exactly as you said. They're not thinking about retirement and they're not preparing for it. When you go up a level to Q2, it's only 14%. And then within Q3, 29, Q4, 44. So there's kind of a trend here. The more you earn, the more you can believe and start thinking about retirement. That seems to be a problem, I think, right? Because these people, you could say in Q1 and Q2, are going to be facing the most problems come retirement but at the same time, they're not saving for them at the rates that the other groups are.
That's true. And if you compare the RSP numbers with TFSA, you will see that the 11% of people in the lowest income quartile are actually saving with TFSA. And that also has something to do with limitation of RSP, where you can only contribute if you have employment income. For low-income individuals, it's possible that they don't have a stable employment income to qualify or give them a very low threshold for contributing to RSP, or because because they're in the lower tax bracket, there is very limited benefit to contribute to RSP to get a tax refund.
That's correct. And I just kind of wonder, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's in one of those lower brackets? What do you think they should do with whatever excess money they have? Would it be better to put into the RRSP or the TFSA?
If they can help not taking the money out, TFSA is certainly a more tax-preferred saving vehicle for lower-income individuals. It's hassle-free, it doesn't require employment income, and it doesn't have the age limit of when you can contribute. And if you're able to start early at a young age to contribute the amount, hopefully the maximum amount in TFSA every year, by the time in your 50s or early 60s, you will have accumulated enough savings to retire comfortably.
And I can't help but feel at the same time that there might be an education gap here. Based on the numbers in that same quartile, the first one, the lowest, 80% of those people, they neither have an RRSP or a TFSA. That's pretty alarming, I would say.
Correct. That again has something to do with lower income individuals are struggling to have enough money to save using either vehicles.
Yes, and I would assume to them the more attractive is to keep it liquid in case something emergency happens, keeping it just in a regular savings account or a checking account even. And there's one more thing I found very interesting within these tables. People under the age of 25, 7% of them are putting money into an RRSP and 14% are putting into a TFSA. But when you make the jump to the next bracket, age 25 to 29, there is a massive jump in RRSP contributions. It goes from 7% to 21%. TFSA, it's only a 3% gain. That signifies to me that around that age is when people start thinking about the future. They're taking it seriously. And do you think that explains why there's such a big jump, or is there another factor at play there?
Another possible reason is that when people get into their later 20s, they start to have more stable jobs and stable employment income, and their income tax rate has gone up because they are making more money. And that is when RSP become a more attractive saving vehicle.
That's true. And bridging off of that, another thing I want to talk about is a fact that was stated in your report. So it goes, the percentage of tax filers who maximize their TFSA contributions declined more markedly from 10% in 2009 to only 2% in 2015. What does that suggest to you?
Well, that's over time because the TFSA contribution limit accumulates every year. We started with 5,000 in 2009, and by 2015, the accumulated limit was over 50,000, if I remembered correctly. That means very few Canadians actually have that much money to be put into TFSA. But to max out in 2009, $5,000 is not extremely difficult for a larger percentage of the population.
That's true. And another key takeaway that I got from your analysis was that this growing unused TFSA contribution room, it might suggest that there is insufficient justification to further raise the contribution limit. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. And there were quite a lot of discussion around 2015 when the government decided to increase the contribution limit. And that increase, almost doubling the contribution limit, was controversial. Because people would have questions about whether this limit increase would benefit the general population, or it would only benefit those who have enough financial means to save that much tax-free.
And I would assume that one of the other consequences of not raising the contribution room or even decreasing it would be a rise in RRSP contributions. So given that train of thought, if you push it to its logical extreme, though, you can make the case that if you make the TFSA contribution room effectively zero, or you get rid of it, it would funnel the savings largely back into the RRSP. That would solve one of the problems outlined in the report, which is the lack of savings for retirement, but not too sure if that's something you would agree with. And if not, where do you think the appropriate cutoff is? Where should we put the limit?
Well, for the limit we have now, because the limit accumulates every year. If you don't put enough money in the current year, it rolls onto the following years. If we keep the current limit, which has been more than sufficient for majority of the Canadians to shelter their savings from tax, as you can see, by 2015, only 2% of the taxpayers are maxing out their TFSA contribution room. So that room, from my opinion, if we keep the contribution limit annually as is now, that should be more than sufficient. I wouldn't agree on canceling TFSA once for all, because it does allow people without employment income or seniors who have retired who no longer eligible for contributing to RSP still will be able to save without paying tax. So these are some benefits for low-income individuals, and for seniors who have retired, TFSA is not replaceable with RSP.
Yes, I agree. 100%. Well said. Now, before I move on to the results section, do you have any other interesting things that stood out to you when you're looking through these charts or going through your sample?
Well, I think we have covered most of the grounds about the contribution limit, about how much people are using them. I'm happy to move forward with the results.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So as mentioned before, the paper outlines that for every 1% increase in a TFSA, it reduces the RRSP contribution by approximately 0.4%. Couldn't this be interpreted to mean that, on average, Canadians are saving more? There's a 0.6% surplus there, and as you noted, it's not really a complete displacement. Where the shift occurs, it seems to be more a timeline thing, that Canadians are maybe looking for more short-term savings?
It could be the case. We only, with the data we have got, the only saving numbers we have access to are the TFSA and RSP savings. We do not know how much people save in their other saving account or in their investment account. So for that reason, even if the 1% increase in TFSA only reduce RSP by 0.4%, we don't know yet that 0.6% remaining are completely new savings. They could be money used to be put into a taxable saving account now transferred into TFSA, which means there is essentially zero new savings at all. We don't know about that. That's the limitation of our study. Another thing we cannot quite say is that whether the saving is short-term or long-term. We know for majority of Canadians, RSP are considered untouchable retirement money, but we don't know exactly whether TFSA serve the same purpose. As you said earlier, it could just be a short-term saving. And if that's the case, the problem could be, the retirement financial problem could be made worse by having money shifted from RSP to TFSA, because now people are even less prepared for retirement.
That's 100% true. I agree with that statement. And it leads me to another question, actually. So it seems to me that aside from the economic benefits of a TFSA, there is also maybe a cultural shift that is affecting people's choices. Historically, productivity has skyrocketed, but wages haven't. Things like owning houses in the GTA, for example, they seem impossible for a majority of millennials. That's not to mention the cost of other rising expenses. If you're not making like six figures or have a strong dual income household, retirement, it might seem more and more out of reach. To what degree do you think that contributed to your findings of maybe a preference for the TFSAs?
So that's something we want to investigate more in our follow-up studies to find out what's the reason behind this shift from RSP to TFSA. It could be the generation, the demographic group change, or how longer people are working, spend their years working rather than retirement, and they don't need to save as much as the previous generations for retirement. For that, I don't have a good answers yet.
That's okay. I thought that was a pretty good answer, actually. So I just want to point out one more thing and get your opinion on this. It's kind of like a summary that I found with the problems. So here's the case. Right now, it might be plausible that Canadians are not saving enough for retirement. Then that's going to fall on the government to try and figure something out. They're going to need money to put forth solutions. At the same time, here comes the other aspect of the issue. They're making less tax revenue due to the decrease in RRSPs. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. You're going to need money to retire. If you can't retire, the government supposedly is going to have to do something about it, but they're going to be less well equipped.
That's a very good point, and that's also another implication of our study because TFSA doesn't allow government to collect tax on people's investment income. There is a large pool of fund in the future that will not get taxed, and that will reduce the income tax base the government will receive, which will reduce the government's ability to support individuals financially when they retire. So that is something that other academic studies have noticed, and there has been discussion going on about what's the best way to integrate the RSP and TFSA into maybe a broader retirement saving vehicle so that people can utilize both to their personal needs at the meantime to achieve the retirement saving goal. So for that, again, that's an issue that we raised and we don't have a good answer yet.
But I look forward to your future findings. I feel like you guys will have a good answer at some point.
Thank you. Well, we'll try.
Yeah. I kind of want to move on to my final question now. And it's more of a generality. Do you have any generic rule of thumbs that people can apply to their own saving strategies? Now, I understand it's probably dependent on the individual circumstances and where they are in life, stuff like that. But maybe some general pointers to help the audience out.
Okay, I think the general principle I would give is to make a saving plan and stick with the plan. And one of the easy rules to follow is to make an auto deposit in your saving account every month as you get your paycheck. You automatically take some amount out and put it aside as saving. And it might not be a big much every month, but once it accumulated over years, you will have a sizable amount of saving for retirement or for other major saving goals you have for yourself.
I think that's a great strategy. And I actually wanted to touch on one more thing, just in follow-up to that. It's a great mindset to have. And people get kind of, you could say, confused with all the options out there. You know, you have mutual funds, individual stocks, stuff like that. And generally, I feel like risk tolerance plays a large part in what people should invest in. Would you agree with that?
I certainly agree with that. And that, like you said earlier, certainly depends on your risk appetite, your age, and how long you're willing to invest your money in these different investment vehicles. For younger individuals or for people who have a long horizon to invest, you can afford more risk. You can afford to wait out the market downturn and wait for the market to go up again. And the compound interest over the long run will be in your favor. But if you have a lower risk tolerance, maybe it's better to stay away from equity and use more fixed income investment tools.
Well, I agree with that 100% as well. So, Lou, thanks for joining us today. It was a very informative chat, and I feel like the audience has a lot of information that they can take home, digest, and learn from.
Thank you, too. You asked lots of good questions, and I hope at least someone in your audience will find some of these things useful.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I look forward to having another conversation with you in the future. So, to our audience, we'll see you soon.
See you.